Just as the War of the Roses inspired the plot of Game of Thrones, the medieval English period known as the Anarchy inspired George R.R. Martin's plot of House of the Dragon, including the duel for the Iron Throne between Rhaenyra and Aegon II. The Anarchy was the period between 1135 and 1154 when medieval England experienced an intense civil war. It was marked by a dispute over the English throne between Matilda, the Empress Maud, and Stephen, her cousin. The Anarchy led to the seizure of power by the royal house of Plantagenet, which governed England between 1154 and 1485.
And the Plantagenet family is a spring-off from William the Conqueror and the family that he brought over when he took England in 1066. Rhaenyra is leading an offshoot that was caused by her father's second marriage, and she's leading that against Aegon II, who represents the current Targaryen institution, essentially, despite being the unplanned heir to Viserys I. Likewise, Empress Matilda is leading her own branch of the Plantagenet family against Stephen, who was crowned against their father's wishes with the help of the church in England.
One critical factor in this drama is that Matilda and her fictional counterpart Rhaenyra are women. This led to major conflict in both the real world and Martin's fictional one.
Rhaenys, a woman, would not inherit the Iron Throne. The Lords instead chose Viserys, my father. Jaehaerys called the Great Council to prevent a war being fought over his succession. For he knew the cold truth. The only thing that could tear down the House of the Dragon was itself.
His male heirs had died before Jaehaerys, and the contention was that the eldest son of his second son would be a better king than the eldest daughter of his first son. And there were a few other people trying to contest the crown here, but the main gist of it came down to, did the people of Westeros want a male heir or a female heir? And they ended up pretty decisively voting for a male heir. And that sets up this precedent that men should always be taking the throne over women. And that's kind of the binding idea of why the Dance of the Dragons happens.
Years later, under the rule of Viserys Targaryen, the great houses swore loyalty to Rhaenyra, ensuring that a woman would finally gain the right to become a ruling queen and take control of the Iron Throne.
I, Corlys Velaryon, promise to be faithful to King Viserys and his named heir, the Princess Rhaenyra. I swear this, by the old gods and the new.
I, Viserys Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do hereby name Rhaenyra Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne.
However, the status quo in both realities resists the idea of change. The possibility of a woman assuming the throne triggered a series of conflicts that would shake power structures and make it necessary to search for alliances, agreements, and new laws to minimize the concentration of power in the hands of monarchs.
The obvious comparison to draw between the Dance of the Dragons and the history of the British monarchy is the Anarchy, which is a period of time not long after William the Conqueror first crossed the Channel and took the throne. So in English history, King Henry I, who would later go on to have several kings named after him, is suddenly faced with a tragedy when his son and heir dies in a shipping accident. It's his desire that his daughter Matilda is crowned as his heir.
Just as the Anarchy began due to a succession crisis, so too did the Dance of the Dragons. As we saw in House of the Dragon, when Viserys names Rhaenyra heir to the Iron Throne, he has no male heirs who can assume power. Rhaenyra was his only legitimate daughter, as the gruesome attempt to produce a boy ended up leading his first wife, Queen Aemma, to die in childbirth. However, as we know, Viserys marries again, and this second marriage produces children, including Aegon II. This closely resembles what happened during the Anarchy. Now, it's not the exact same story, nor the exact same characters. However, there are plenty of parallels between the two conflicts.
The parallels to English history here are that Stephen, who was a male descendant and a male claim to the throne, was given heavy support by the church when he took the throne that was meant to be given to Matilda, who at this point is an empress. And Matilda is across the sea in Normandy when she realizes this, just like how Rhaenyra was across the sea in Dragonstone when she realizes this. And Matilda, throughout the course of the Anarchy, relies a lot on her male alliances to progress through the wall.
Just as Viserys finds himself growing old and without sons to inherit the throne, Henry I in real history had no option but to name Matilda, his only legitimate daughter, as his successor. Let's examine Henry I. He was the son of William the Conqueror and ruled England and Normandy from 1100 to 1135. Despite having an estimated 24 illegitimate children, Henry I had only 2 legitimate children, both from his first marriage with Matilda of Scotland. Matilda, Empress Maud, and William Adeline. William Adeline died prematurely in 1120 when his ship sank in the English Channel. So Henry I's only remaining legitimate heir was Matilda, his daughter. There was no formal written law during the English Middle Ages that women could not become ruling queens, but it was not an accepted tradition. The title of queen was given only to the king's wives, who could advise but could not rule. To complicate matters further, there were no clearly defined inheritance laws. Many decisions were based on custom, and it was common for heirs to dispute the right to the throne after the death of a king. Moreover, the notions of nation, territory, and nationality would only be defined centuries later. Therefore, when assuming the position of king, a ruler needed to maintain the loyalty and submission of his nobles. A king's authority was only valid if it was recognized by the nobles of his court. This was not guaranteed, but had to be earned. So while he was still alive, Henry I made his entire court and nobles who supported him swear loyalty to Matilda to ensure she would be heir to the throne upon his death. Of course, this is what happens in episode 1 between King Viserys and Rhaenyra. But despite having sworn loyalty to Matilda, Henry I's court was actually not in favor of her as ruling queen. Not only was she a woman and therefore considered incapable of governing, making political decisions, and leading troops, her husband at the time, Geoffrey V, Count of Anjou, was considered a rival to English rule in Normandy. For the sake of context, William the Conqueror, father of Henry I, was responsible for unifying the Kingdom of Normandy, French territory, with England. However, English control in Normandy was always tenuous, making it necessary for William the Conqueror's successors to monitor the situation closely and arrange strategic alliances, like Matilda's marriage with the Count of Anjou. Before marrying the Count of Anjou, Matilda had already been married once, a marriage also arranged by her father to Henry V, Holy Roman Emperor. It was because of this marriage she became known as the Empress Maud.
So just like Matilda, Rhaenyra marries twice, once at the order of her father to Rhaenor Velaryon, which is where her first 3 children come from, and second to Daemon out of love, desire, and also a lust for power. Her marriages represent her willingness to take more political steps in her future and acknowledging that marriage at the end of the day is a very powerful political tool. Rhaenyra displays a lot of reluctance early on in season 1 at the thought of marrying someone she doesn't want to, but by season 2 we can see that she's much more comfortable with this idea of using marriage as a political weapon to further her claim to the Iron Throne.
No coincidence that her real-world counterpart undergoes a similar evolution. In January 1114, at almost 12 years old, Matilda marries Henry V and becomes Empress of the Holy Roman Empire. Then in 1125, Matilda, now aged 23, is summoned by Henry I to return to England because she's the only legitimate heir to the English throne. 1127, the nobles of Henry I's court swear an oath in the Great Hall at Westminster that they will support Matilda's right to succeed Henry I to the throne of England as the first English queen. But first, Henry I wants Matilda to give him a grandson to secure the lineage. But he also wants to secure part of the Norman borders and strengthen English control in Normandy. So Matilda was betrothed again, this time to Geoffrey V, Count of Anjou, who has land in southern Normandy. In 1133, Matilda gives birth to her first son, Henry. A year later, she has another son, ensuring that Henry I would have male heirs. Now, by this time, Henry is already well into his 60s, so concern abounded whether Matilda would take the throne. Sure enough, 2 years later, in 1135, Henry I falls ill. Knowing the risks of his death and that his grandchildren are only 2 years old, Henry I summons his nobles and reinforces the request for Matilda to succeed him. She's living in Normandy, however, and Geoffrey is not well regarded by the English nobles, who are allied with Henry I. Then Henry I dies. This is still in 1135, and Matilda starts consolidating her power in Normandy and trying to take his place on the throne of England. However, she's pregnant again. She's across the English Channel in Normandy, and the nobles aren't a fan of her new husband. And again, a ruling queen is uncommon. Enter Matilda's cousin, Stephen, who sees an opportunity for himself. Note the similarities to the series.
My father is a king. It is his duty to take a new wife and strengthen his line.
But I understand the order of things. I'm not sure you do.
And that is another kind of symbol of what women have to deal in the society. Their inheritances are always deprioritized over men, and they are shipped off to make political alliances in marriages. And so the scene between two women talking about how they're treated in the society, even as highborns, is a sign of the coming conflict towards the end of the season.
Now, while in the House of the Dragon universe, Rhaenyra's great rival was Aegon, her half-brother, in real life, Matilda's rival was Stephen of Blois, her cousin, a conflict not dissimilar to the one showcased in the very first scene of House of the Dragon. Stephen is the son of Henry I's sister. This nephew-uncle pair had become close when Stephen came to live at his court and helped consolidate Henry I's control in Normandy. Now things are getting good. Realizing that Matilda's grip on the throne is not as tight as she might think, Stephen uses his contacts to seize power for himself. And it works. In the same year as Henry I's death, 1135, Stephen is crowned King of England with the support of the English Church, in particular his younger brother, Henry of Blois, Bishop of Winchester. So with Stephen's anointing as king by the Church and the recognition of his authority by the nobles, Matilda realizes she'll have difficulty honoring her father's wish that she be his heir to the throne.
We saw this idea that the right to rule was something passed down. It was the mandate of heaven, and each monarch was uniquely positioned to benefit from that, and they passed that on to their heirs and their children. That was why the idea of succession was so important. It's not just carrying on your family, it's also carrying on the right given to your family by God or by some higher power.
Stephen neglects control of Normandy, leaving the territory in total anarchy by 1138. Interestingly, due to another succession crisis, the Plantagenet dynasty would claim the French throne in 1340, a claim that English kings would only relinquish in the early 19th century. But I digress. Around this same time, Robert Gloucester declares his support for Matilda. Robert is Matilda's half-brother, one of Henry I's illegitimate children. His military power in England was significant, and by siding with Matilda, the pressure on Stephen increased considerably, as did Matilda's chances. With Robert's military support, Matilda can risk leaving Normandy and traveling to England to fight for the throne. David I of Scotland, Matilda's uncle, also offered his support to his niece in the Civil War. And so the support of Robert Gloucester and David I of Scotland resembles the alliance between Rhaenyra and Daemon.
With Daemon at her side, that claim becomes a lot stronger. Daemon has a lot of the legitimacy of the Targaryen family entrusted in him. He wields the sword Dark Sister, which is one of the most important heirlooms to the family. He has a significant amount of political power. He's one of the most experienced generals in the land. Whether the lords like him or hate him, Daemon is certainly a respected figure. He also holds a lot of sway over King's Landing and the Crown Lands, which is where he's been the most politically active. And he's also a big part of why the War in the Stepstones went so well in Season 1. So Daemon brings a lot of visual legitimacy and expertise to Rhaenyra's claim to the throne. Daemon represents a significant amount of power, not just because of his dragon, but also because of his military experience, and he lends a lot of legitimacy through that. With her marriage with Daemon, she has 2 new heirs who are unquestionably Targaryen, and that strengthens a lot of support for her as well.
Note that, unlike Rhaenyra, Matilda did not have a marriage or romantic relationship with her uncle, David I. At least, there's no historical evidence about this. Anyway, in 1139, Matilda sets foot on English soil for the first time in 8 years. And almost immediately, England is engulfed in an intense and bloody civil war. Especially many battles took place in the countryside, which greatly damaged the agriculture and civilian populations.
So the obvious comparison is that both the Anarchy and the Dance of the Dragons leave the country in an absolute state. The countryside has been demolished by roaming armies in both cases. Tithes and taxes are at an all-time high. The Anarchy was devastating on West England in particular, where so much of the fighting was, and in Westeros, the Riverlands, which is always the first kingdom to fall to the fire during the war, is completely decimated.
In 1141, Matilda's troops capture Stephen as prisoner. For the first time since the death of Henry I, the throne of England was within Matilda's reach. She would soon win the support of the church, too. Henry the Bishop summarized the church's decision. "We choose as Lady of England and Normandy the daughter of a king who was a peacemaker, a glorious king, a wealthy king, a good king, without peer in our time, and we promise her faith and support." But this story is far from finished. Opposition to Matilda grows among the nobles and the troops loyal to Stephen, and they begin to scheme. We can see this reflected in Rhaenyra's image after Daemon orchestrates the murder of Jaehaerys Targaryen, son of Aegon II.
This is one of the first conversations we see between Daemon and Rhaenyra, where they are truly honest with themselves. And in this scene, Daemon takes on the role of masculinity in Westerosi society. He is entitled to a power that he's been always told is his. He is aggressive, he's competitive. In many ways, Daemon embodies what highborn Westerosi lords are meant to be like. And Rhaenyra embodies a more compassionate side of things, ones that are more traditionally associated with femininity in this world. The tension here comes from the fact that Daemon is in fact not the king. He's the younger brother and now only the king consort to the queen. And Rhaenyra, despite being a woman, which flies in the face of all tradition, is technically the queen. And you see the clash between those two ideologies here.
The death of Aegon II's heir was an example of what Rhaenyra was capable of.
The strongest actors in the history of the British monarchy have always been people who are very tapped into how the public sees them. At the moment Otto hears about the death of Prince Jaehaerys, he immediately thinks, okay, how can we make this into an advantage? And his idea is to do a public funeral, which is something a lot of monarchies have done in real life throughout history. We even saw it with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And his idea is to make this funeral into something that the small folk can get behind and to redirect their hatred for that towards Queen Rhaenyra. So Otto here represents a very sly way of looking at monarchies and their role in culture and public perception. He uses the death of a prince to poke hatred towards his political opponent, who is in her own right another monarch.
Matilda's son, Henry, tries to continue the conflict with Stephen, but his military power is weak, showing that in real life, as in fiction, a cycle of violence always looks for ways to maintain itself.
One of the most enduring themes of George R.R. Martin's works is the cycle of violence. This is an idea that he's very critical of, and it subverts a lot of the traditional fantasy tropes that we're used to. We're usually told to root for characters who want revenge or are seeking, some great act of vengeance on an enemy, but in the world of Game of Thrones, people often get punished for this. And so we see this a lot in the first seasons of the original show, and how the Starks slowly get whittled down due to their lust for revenge. But in House of the Dragon, we also see this. The moment that Rhaenyra asks for Aemon's head on a plate is the moment that she really seals her fate, because that is what prompts Daemon to go and order the assassination of Prince Jaehaerys, and that is something that turns everyone against her.
At long last, the resolution of the Anarchy consists of a compromise. Despite a failure to be crowned queen, Matilda does gain something. Henry II, Matilda's son, becomes heir to the throne after Stephen's death. The rest of the world gained something from this chaos too. This destructive dispute between monarchs forces English nobles to begin thinking of ways to limit the powers of kings and queens. It's only about 60 years from the end of the Anarchy until the Magna Carta arrives and marks the beginning of modern politics. This document, signed in 1215, prevents kings from using their power to embroil their countries in the cycle of violence we just witnessed. Further, it tries to create harmony among the nobles, local representatives, and the monarch. As we learned during the Anarchy, the support of the nobles was essential to the legitimacy of the king. Some of the Magna Carta's clauses have endured and remain applicable to this day as limits on governmental authority. No free man shall be seized, imprisoned, dispossessed, outlawed, exiled, or ruined in any way, nor in any way proceeded against, except by the lawful judgment of his peers and the law of the land. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. And who was the king who agreed to this royal charter of rights? One of the most important documents of all time, which introduced the very idea in Europe of the limitation of government power? That would be King John, Matilda's grandson. In the House of the Dragon universe, the succession struggle hasn't led to any kind of Magna Carta-like document. Yet. This video is brought to you by Students for Liberty's Local Coordinator Program. If you're a university student who loves this kind of socio-political content, the Local Coordinator Program is for you. Learn more at join.studentsforliberty.org.